Hello and welcome to an India Today special broadcast from Poland. I'm Gaurav Savant. India Today has the biggest team of reporters on ground from Kyiv to Moscow to Poland to get you a 360-degree perspective of the latest developments. US President Joe Biden is all set to arrive here in Warsaw for his meet with Poland's president. He's also likely to visit a humanitarian assistance camp where more than 2 million refugees who fled Ukraine since the start of the war from the 24th of February have been staying. Some, of course, have moved on. We'll get you that story and lots more. But first, our top story.
Putin's war machine keeps rolling. No end to Russian hostilities. Sanctions taxing Russia. Did Putin massively miscalculate this war? US rallies troops closer to Ukraine. India Today's exclusive report from conflict zone.
Now, the US forces are also gearing up here in Poland. Additional forces are likely to be deployed. Now, about 350 kilometers from Warsaw is a place barely 50 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, where US troops have been deployed with their weapons and systems. Now, is this part of a North Atlantic Treaty Organization's exercise and a massive exercise that will take place in this region? A plan. I traveled to ground zero to bring you this report about the deployment of US forces in Poland. The military tents that you see behind me are the new American camps that have come up. We are about 300 kilometers from Poland's capital, Warsaw. We are currently in a place called Mokre Jamosh. This is an airfield. And if you notice in this airfield, there are a number of tents that have come up. These tents are the new American airbase that's been set up in Poland. Now, there are a large number of American troops who are now deployed in this area. Now, if you look just behind me there, that entire green cover are American military tents. They have American military hardware, from armored personnel carriers to Humvees to certain radars that have been set up to troop carriers that have come up in this area. And they've come up from mid-March to now, and the numbers are increasing. This is an airfield. That's the airfield. This is the Mokre Jamosh airfield. This is barely 50 kilometers from Ukraine's border. And civilian movement in this area is now restricted. This entire area is not only barricaded, but you have American troops deployed at every entrance to this airfield. Now, are these American troops here as part of a North Atlantic Treaty Organization country, NATO military exercise? They started coming here. The initial troops or the pioneers came in between mid to end February, and the larger number of troops are still coming in. We spoke to some of these soldiers, but they said they're not cleared to speak to media about the nature of the deployment or the duration of the deployment in Poland, close to the border with Ukraine. But there are radars that are here, there are Humvees that are here, and there are certain other military hardware that is coming in to this area, is what locals tell India Today. US President Joe Biden is also to fly in to Warsaw for talks with Poland. Now, while that is a lot to do also with humanitarian assistance that will be provided to Poland for Poland looking after more than 2 million refugees who've come in from Ukraine. But Poland is also looking for additional military hardware, from surface to air missiles to fighter jets from the United States, and more troops on ground. America did commit to about 3,000 additional troops being sent here. 7,000 American troops as part of rotation are in the NATO territory right now. But Poland wants more to strengthen its security, especially with Russian missiles falling very close to Poland's border with Ukraine. With cameraman Lalit Joshi in Poland, Gaurav Savant for India Today.
Nearly a month of this war, nearly a month of endless violence across the beautiful landscape of Ukraine. But there's one city that stands tall despite the Russian shelling. One city that has endured and persisted no matter what Russia has thrown at it. Ukraine's capital of Kyiv, the citadel that Putin wants but hasn't been able to dominate so far. Ukrainian forces are guarding Kyiv with everything they've got. It's where President Volodymyr Zelensky also remains camped.
It was a day of difficult events, difficult conclusions, but it was another day that brought us all closer to our victory, to peace for our state. Glory to Ukraine.
In a significant victory, the key suburb of Markiv is back in Ukrainian control as Russian troops were pushed further away from the capital.
From official sources, we receive information. Right now, the small city Makariv and almost whole Irpin already in the control is Ukrainian soldier.
Ukraine also put out a video of Russian saboteurs being detained in the capital, pinned down to the ground and taken into custody. But that doesn't mean Russia has backed off. Russian troops blew up a bridge over the Desna River that connects the city of Chernihiv to Kyiv. This bridge was being used for civilian evacuation and humanitarian aid. That is no longer possible, as nothing remains now of that bridge.
There were 2 barrages of rockets fired from multi-barrel rocket launchers, which was about 30 blasts, if I could count them, 15 and then 15, which was also in the eastern part of the city, heavy bombardment. As far as ground forces are concerned, there is not much movement. The reports are Russian forces are digging in and making the defenses on the perimeter of Kyiv city so that in case there's any counterattack from Ukrainian forces, they can stop it. Also, that they are probably trying to encircle the city and stay as such and not trying to enter the city.
So how close is Russia to the capital city? The latest data suggests that Russian efforts to capture Kyiv remain stalemated. Ukrainian defenses have badly disrupted the Russian advance on the east bank of the Dnipro. Russians seem to be now focused on ramping up their presence to the west of Kyiv.
This near to Brovary, it's open information. From the west of Ukraine, from the north, in behind the Lutish, and there is big battle.
Russian troops have been facing an uphill battle getting into Kyiv. Chechens from the Sheikh Mansour Volunteer Battalion also engaged in an intense battle with the Russian military near Kyiv. The question is, how long can Ukraine's capital hold out for? With Rajesh Pawar in Kyiv, Bureau Report, India Today. And remember, it's been nearly a month of a non-stop combat operation in Ukraine, and there's no sign of the military operation actually calming down or even ending. Day 28 saw shelling, cruise missile attacks, and rocket attacks in different cities, including right in the center of the city that is Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. Take a look at what day 28 looked like. A month into this war, Ukraine is definitely bruised and bleeding. Damage and devastation on the streets of Ukrainian cities as the war enters its 28th day. In the Marinka town of the Donetsk region in the east, the scenes are of devastation and destruction. Charred houses, buildings reduced to rubble, another city flattened, piles of rubble everywhere. The second largest city of Ukraine, Kharkiv, continues to witness intense and daily Russian shelling. Residential and commercial buildings of the city in many neighborhoods are piles of ruin. In the besieged eastern port city of Mariupol, Russian troops can be seen launching an all-out attack with military tanks rolling on the streets of the city. Ukrainian President Zelensky has warned that the current humanitarian catastrophe is spiraling and unfolding in the port city.
As of today, there are about 1 lakh people in Mariupol in inhumane conditions under a full blockade, with no food, no water and no medicine, under constant shelling and bombardment. For more than a week now, we have been trying to organize stable humanitarian corridors for Mariupol residents, and almost all our attempts, unfortunately, are disrupted by Russian occupiers, by shelling or deliberate terror.
Chilling images of intensifying Russian attacks. Russian troops launched cruise missiles from Sevastopol area of Crimea under their occupation. In the northern city of Chernihiv, Russian troops bombed a bridge that connects with the capital Kyiv just to the south. The bridge was being used for humanitarian aid and evacuation of civilians. Putin's army shelled multiple buildings in Kyiv's Obolon. Loud explosions were heard in the eastern part of the city. Reports suggest that over 30 rockets were fired in this particular Russian offensive. But Ukraine continues to fight back. In a big win, Ukrainian troops were able to regain control over the strategically important suburb of the capital, dealing an important blow to Russian forces. The Ukrainian government released a video of Russian forces detained in Kyiv with their weapons. Despite Russia's ultimatums and even a nuclear threat, Ukrainian President Zelensky has sought dialogue.
We continue to work at various levels and to urge Russia to peace, to end this brutal war. Ukrainian representatives are working on the negotiations, which continue virtually daily. It is very difficult, sometimes confrontational, but step by step, we are moving forward.
With Rajesh Pawar in Kyiv, Bureau Report, India Today.
28 days, and it has become pretty clear to observers both inside and outside Ukraine, inside and outside Russia, that President Putin hasn't been able to reach his military and political objectives with the kind of speed that he perhaps wanted to. There was a sense that Russia wanted to dominate Ukraine in as little as 3 days with a shock and awe operation. But that clearly hasn't happened, and the Russian army finds itself completely bogged down for a series of reasons. Why has it become not a lightning war, but a grinding war in Ukraine? What has trapped the Russian army in that country? Take a look.
Simply put, it's an epic David versus Goliath story. Russia outranks Ukraine in active military personnel strength 5-1. Moscow has 6 times more combat jets than Kyiv. Putin's defense budget is 10 times that of Zelensky's. Technically, Ukraine should have been defeated in a matter of days. But in a real war theatre, that's not the case. There are many variables and many dynamics. The war here has been very, very different. Bruised, battered and besieged Kyiv is still fighting and giving a bloody nose to Putin's war machine and his fabled army. 4 weeks and counting, but Russia has been unable to use its military and air power to the fullest. So what exactly afflicts the Russian president's war? Sample this. A full frontal infantry assault by Russia would result in far bigger numbers of fatalities. Cities cannot simply be won by punishing firepower. Capturing them demands closing in and creating footholds at the periphery and eventually getting inside. But given Ukraine's resilience, that will mean countless casualties. Does Moscow have the stomach for that? Since Russia began the invasion, there has been no major physical combat to capture territory. Russian tanks and other specialized war vehicles have been stalled at many war fronts. often suffering heavy damage. Powerful Russian armor has fallen prey to next-generation light anti-tank weapons supplied by the West and NATO. The Javelin anti-tank missiles and Bayraktar drones from Turkey have proven nemesis to the Russian army, which has failed to root out pockets of resistance. Russia's famed air force and attack helicopters are often seen struggling against ragtag Ukrainian air force and determined fighters armed with shoulder-fired missiles supplied by the West. Russia almost being seen as reluctant to deploy its manpower to the fullest to capture Ukraine's capital Kyiv, dragging the war into an endless, grinding bombing mission. Putin also didn't bargain for the body bags of Russian soldiers. Since his country has witnessed the biggest drop in population since World War II, owing to a falling fertility rate in Russia, which translates into losing close to 10 lakh people alone in the year-long period between October 2020 and September 2021. The declining birth rates can potentially reduce Russia's 14.5 crore population to 13.6 crores by 2040. Russia has also failed miserably to read asymmetric warfare on the ground in Ukraine. It aimed to finish the invasion in 3 days flat, but Putin's tanks ran dry in just 72 hours into the invasion with a lack of refills, maintenance, and a crippled logistics supply. The struggling Russian war machine moves with a month into this invasion. The struggles on the ground for Russia could prove disastrous, not just in Ukraine, but overall for Putin. Bureau Report, India Today.
In the early days of the invasion of Ukraine, Russia had operationalized its nuclear arsenal, sending shockwaves all around the world. Then you had the foreign minister of Russia say that any new global war or a World War III would necessarily have a nuclear complexion to it. And now those nuclear forces are on high alert once again, with the third big threat coming out of Russia, that any future action with the NATO getting involved in what's happening in Ukraine will and possibly have a nuclear response.
Relentless onslaught on Ukraine. Ravaged cities, hundreds of casualties, but not much headway in winning the war. With its Ukraine offensive sputtering, Russia came out with yet another brazen nuclear threat, daring the West using its enormous nuclear stockpile. Refusing to rule out use of nuclear power, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov asserted that Russia would only use nuclear weapons in context of the ongoing war in Ukraine if there was an existential threat. He said Russia has a concept of domestic security and it's public, and that the reasons for nuclear arms to be used was there for everyone to see. While existential threat can mean anything Putin deems fit, this is not the first time Russia has flexed muscle and hinted at a nuclear attack. On February 28, Putin asked his defense forces to put nuclear deterrence on high alert.
Приказываю министру обороны и начальнику генерального штаба перевести силы сдерживания российской армии в особый режим несения боевого дежурства.
Putin has also shown eagerness to capture Ukrainian nuke plants, evident from his attacks on premises of Zaporizhzhia plant and destruction of a Chernobyl lab. But what's forcing Russia to resort to nuke threats? Is Putin merely flexing his nuclear muscle, or is it dangerous brinkmanship after failure to win the war, even 4 weeks into the invasion? Geeta Mohan in Moscow, Bureau Report, India Today.
There have been 6 rounds of talks so far, and they've led to absolutely nothing. President Zelensky of Ukraine has asked not once, not twice, but 3 times, suggesting that possibly the only real way to de-escalate things between Russia and Ukraine is if he, Zelensky, and President Putin in Russia come face to face for a one-on-one meeting. No format, no conditions involved, but that's the proposal. Russia has rejected that. But people are asking, is a Zelensky-Putin summit or meeting the only way to stop what's happening?
"28 days and counting. Millions have fled their homes. The human cost continues to mount. The economy is flattened. But there are no signs of an end to this war. After 6 rounds of peace talks, a breakthrough still eludes Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has once again called for direct talks with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. Russia has rejected Zelensky's demand right away. Moscow says the president-level talks can happen only after the two sides agree on a deal.
With regards to the internal Ukrainian dialogue, it's upon Ukraine now after our operation in Ukraine ends. I hope it ends with the signing of a comprehensive agreement on security issues, that is Ukraine's neutral status with the guarantees of its security.
Much will also depend on where the US stands. American President Joe Biden is traveling to Poland this week. President Biden will not be visiting Ukraine despite request by Kyiv. President Zelensky is making no bones about his disappointment with his Western allies. While Ukraine is putting up a fierce fight despite relentless Russian bombardment, the question is how long they can do that. This is one war neither side seems to have an endgame. Bureau Report, India Today.